So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. David Smith, a passionate educator and engaging speaker with over 20 years in the Rocky View School District, has been appointed principal of the new grade 10 to 12 online school, so Summit Trails. Known for his dedication to fostering school culture and promoting mental health and wellness, Smith has collaborated with numerous organizations to enhance school wellness initiatives. Since joining RVS in 1999, Smith has served as an administrator in several schools across Rocky View County. He also played a key role in guiding transitions between online and in-person learning. Smith holds a master's degree in education in leadership and administration from the University of Calgary, a Bachelor of Education from the University of Toronto, and a Bachelor of Fine Arts honors from York University. Take it away, Mr. Smith.
Today, in this hour, I'm going to share with you some information that, frankly, 10 years ago, we suspected was occurring in our world, but we weren't really sure. We didn't really have anything that we could concretely say that this is why we're thinking sort of the way that we are right now, or these are some of the challenges that we're having with youth and with children right now. We suspected some things, but we weren't sure. Well, in this last year, various researchers and psychologists, doctors, the folks of that nature started pulling together research from around the world on just how youth and young people were experiencing life. And the stats that I'm going to show you today are going to be, I think, shocking for some of you. But I just want to talk about the influence that we're seeing. This is not my opinion or anything of that nature. This is just what is now being revealed through research. And so as I'm chatting, realize that this is generalized about a generation. Doesn't mean that this is true about you. But as I'm talking, you might notice some things about you. And, what's that G.I. Joe saying? Not knowledge is power. Oh, yeah. Knowing is half the battle. I think that's what it was. I was G.I. Joe when I was a kid. And it's this understanding of if you have a little set of knowledge and you apply that knowledge to yourself, then you're further ahead. So that's what I want to share with you today. And if you have any questions or any wonderings as we're going, I am going to ask you questions. So stay with me for the presentation. And here we go. Let's get started. So a little bit about who I am. And this is important because the context of me and my generation influences how I look at things, right? Just like you. But I like the outdoors. I play music. I'm a trombonist by trade and music teacher and all that fun jazz. I love cooking. And my family's up above. My kiddos are all in university right now. And so we have just lived through the high school world, and now they're living through the college world. That's Ricky, my Labradoodle. And I do enjoy the outdoors, but I also really enjoy tech. I totally could have put a computer on there because tech is pretty wild. Anyhow, here we go. Let's get started. And I want to use an analogy for you that I'm hoping I get time to get back to. And the analogy is this. I want you to imagine that we took the Earth, how our experiences on Earth, and we just transported them to another planet that's similar to Earth, but not quite like Earth. So it's like, this is not real, right? These pictures aren't real. We don't actually have a place on the moon just yet. But if we did, it might look like something like this, right? So, we're navigating up here. We got this cool little dome where we're growing plants. This is actually a real picture, okay? How they grow plants, right? So imagine that this is plausible. And so the question would be, if you grew up on the moon, would you have the same brain development process growing up on the moon as you would on Earth? So here's our kiddo, yay, growing up. And now let's say we take the same kiddo and we drop them on the moon. And not moon like moon right now, like, if we were actually living on the moon. Would the brain development of these two individuals be roughly the same? Here's why we've got this analogy. If we look at Earth of the human experience of thousands and thousands of years, and we say that this is, quote, real life or physical life, okay, then the moon would represent for us maybe something more like virtual life. It's like the Earth, but not really. You can't just go out on, on the moon and just go on a swing set and have fun. Number one, there's no gravity. You're going to fly away. Yeah, and so you have to put on suits and all this stuff. Like it's not right. It's not the same experience. And so the virtual world is analogous to sort of like living on the moon. And the premise of this book is saying, why do we think if we take a child and transport them into a virtual world that they're going to have the same brain development and experiences and all this great stuff as if they were interacting with real human beings? Why would we think this would be the same? Right? Okay, that's the question that's being asked. And so the real life, the physical world, we're saying represents brain development with minimal technology influence, whereas the virtual world being transported to like Earth, but not quite, is brain development with technology. So that's the premise of where we're going on here, okay? Yeah, yay, fun times. So what does this have to do with anything? Let's talk about the brain a little bit. So here is the picture of a brain of a 5-year-old and then a preteen, teenager, and 20-year-old. The non-blue and purple, okay, so the red up to yellow, green, represents where the information hasn't matured yet. So here's what I mean by that. When you are learning, your neurons are firing. And neurons are in your brain. They're like this, and they're interacting, electrical impulses through chemical, right? And they're firing and they're learning. And as new information comes in, as they fire, they connect and they create pathways. And these pathways help us understand our world, the perception of what is around us. Makes natural sense, right? And so when we look at from birth to 5 years old, you can see, what areas here are actually starting to be developed. Okay, so when we look at the frontal lobe, which is this section up here, okay, this is where personality, decision-making, movement, even speech is a part of that area too. This is all in this frontal region, which is actually, you'll see, just looking at the pictures, that's the last thing that really develops. But you can see that for under a 5-year-old, especially in this region of the frontal lobe, it's really not developed at all. In fact, what is developed is in the midsection of our brain, okay, and this is called the parietal lobe. And here, this is where we identify objects, spatial relationships, right? Kids playing with toys, things like that. This is the interpretation part of our brain. Hey, this is soft. This is hard. Ooh, that's hot, right? And also spoken language also is midsection of the brain. So as we're hearing, right, and saying, the little child saying, how do I say that? It's forming. And you can see right off the hop, up to 5 years old, this is already maturing, this aspect of our brain, which makes sense. What's like the first things you do? You crawl, you learn to speak, right? So it's being developed. And then when we look at the back of our brain, the occipital lobe, this is now we're starting to really get into vision. So it's the interpretation of what we see, and what we see is interpreting into our brain to understand our perception of our world. Right? Okay. So why is this a big deal? Our brain development, okay, up until the last 15 years has been solely, and by solely I mean, 99%, solely developed from human to human contact. It's been developed by interacting with other humans to train other humans how to live, right? And so when we look here at a preteen, so this is a 11-year-old, 12-year-old, we can see, we're moving forward in this brain development. We can see some change, but you can see the brain here is still forming brand new connections around personality, decision making, okay, identity. So preteen still thinking, man, I don't have my identity here set yet. Then we get into as a teenager, so many of these things are starting to mature now, okay, in terms of neurons that have connected. But we still have this frontal lobe that is still developing, which is right, makes sense. But we can see we're well on our way. Even as a 20-year-old, now we're like, hey, now things are pretty solid, but there's still that room, right, of development in the brain that's saying, yeah, there's still room for you to make brand new connections about your identity. Okay, this is a big deal, and here's why. So when we look at the brain development up until the first year of age, so from 0 to 12 months, okay, this is the highest forms of connection for language and basically vision and understanding. But the higher cognitive functioning, I mean, it's developing here, right? It is just skyrocketing because we're taking in as much as we can. We're trying to make as many connections as we can and understand our world. But you see that the development side of this starts peaking out at around 5 years of age. What does that mean? That means your brain is taking as much as it can from the world around you, and it is developing its story. It's coding the understanding of the world around itself. And the reason why this is a big deal in relation to what we're talking about today is who influences that initial formation of our brain, which has to do with identity and perception. Okay, so why is this a big deal? Neurons that fire together wire together. When they wire together, your pathway will continually start going through the wired connections. Like, do you ever wonder why you have some habits that you don't even know you're doing? It's like, why am I tapping my foot? I didn't even realize I was tapping my foot. Why do I say the word like all the time? And I didn't realize I was saying the word like or whatever it is. It's because that neuron pathway or the neurological pathway has been developed that it's just traveling there all the time. So think about that as we move forward into influences. So up until the last 15 years, our development, again, has always been between a parent, let's say, or a caregiver and you, or you interacting on the playground as a little kid and interacting what's going on around you. You seeing real things, observing, making decisions, or at least thinking about it, or trying to interpret them. But it's been human to human. We haven't had tech to human in terms of that development yet. So who is this affecting? Okay. And you folks are more into this Gen Z area, I would think. Okay. Most of you between the ages of 16 up to 30. Okay. So Gen Y, and I'm Gen X, so I'm down here. So all these generations before you, our brains were formed from that human to human natural connection. Yes, we were influenced by technology, but not nearly as what we see now, not even remotely. I remember when I got my first flip phone. You folks were not even think, what is a flip phone? Like, and I can go through all these things, but they didn't influence my brain development. They only influenced my experience. Okay. Gen Z is the first generation where technology and the aspects of technology actually became part of their brain development. And the reason why this is important is across the world, we've been looking at why are youth finding life more difficult than youths of the past? What's changed? Have we changed that much of parents? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Gen Alpha, so that's age 15 and under. So if you're born 2010 and on, okay, Gen Alpha is 100% influenced by this rewiring. And Gen Beta, we're going to see what happens. right now, because we're learning new things. And so we'll see what parents do moving forward about how they influence that. We're going to come back to this graph, but just sort of understand what we're talking about here. So Gen Z, which is you, is the first generation in history. When I mean history, I'm not talking about 100 years, right? I mean history of mankind. In the history of personkind that is going through puberty with a portal of the world in your pocket, right? This is the first generation where they're being called away to an alternative virtual universe, like the moon, we'll say. And though this is exciting, it's also showing us how unstable and addictive and unsuitable for children. And so this is one of the premises of the book. And you're saying, yeah, but what are we talking about? What are you talking about exactly, Mr. Smith? Is this for real? Okay, so here's where they're taking this info. Oops. Okay, here we go. Take a peek here. And I'm going to ask you a question about what you think about some of these stats in the next minute here, so you know it's coming. So 2002, we start up with Friendster. So Apple released their awesome smartphone, I think 2001. Pretty amazing, right? But it's still in development phases, still utilitarian. So not a ton of apps or some games on there. MySpace kicked off. I don't know if you even remember MySpace anymore. I'm like, what space? Who's space? Facebook, all right, they stuck around. 2004, Facebook starts up, making connections around the world. Twitter kicks in, and now we are hearing news that are occurring everywhere, everyone's opinion. Now it's being, blurted out. Big changes, right? Now, midsection here. WID6. I'm not even sure exactly what WID6 is. I'm not sure if it's still around, but I do remember Tumblr. And then boom, Instagram kicks in 2010. And in 2010, this is when things changed in terms of what we could do with connection and what we could do with companies reaching out to you as individuals to try to get you to interact with them. And it started changing, okay, how we see things. And so as Instagram started revealing pictures, very quick conversations, then it began this rise of, am I acceptable, me personally, based upon what I'm seeing on my phone? This was the beginning. Snapchat kicks in. We know what Snapchat does. Vine kicks in, TikTok, and then the list starts going, right? On and on and on. And we're going to talk about in a second here what was one of the big deals about, well, here we are, 2015. 2015, this is a boom psychology-wise, and here's why. In 2015, algorithms were developed on every social platform, including Google, including the search engines, certainly YouTube, where the algorithm was learning who you were. And it was under the guise, and I think you know this, it's under the guise of we're trying to make your experience better. Okay. And the only way we can make your experience better is to know you more. So to know you more, we need to record where you're going. And then we record where you're going, like what you click on YouTube. Let's say you're watching shorts, where you pause on that short and you watch that video. Ah, you like video about cats? Okay. Next time you come back, we're going to have some more cats for you ready to go. And so the algorithm began to influence what you see and build upon it. And that's a whole other issue. In fact, if you are interested in reading another book that this book references quite a bit, it's called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. And Stolen Focus actually interviews and talks to the creators of the algorithms for Facebook, Meta, all these different things. And they talk about why they did it and how they did the algorithms with the guise of to have you come back to the platform over and over again. But there was an unintended result. And the unintended result is what we're seeing now amongst our youth and our brain development. So algorithms in 2015 took off, and there was no check with it at all. During that time, it was also the like and dislike. So do you approve someone or you disapprove someone? You guys know this. Connection went like this, All right. Less rules around who you could connect with. Okay. And it was easy. Oh man, it was so easy to now get on there, create accounts, easy peasy. So ease went up. And so more access started occurring. Okay. So 2015, I want you to keep that in your mind. This graphic here came in 2015. So I found this. The picture is marked like metadata wise as being revealed in 2015. Look what we saw, big changes here happening in our world. Okay, our world at this time, I think, was around 7 billion, maybe 7.5 billion. So 3.6 billion people were on social media. So half our entire world, okay, is connected in this way. So 2 billion are saying, yeah, we're socially connected. We are good to go. Okay. And then active internet users in terms of like active in terms of living their life through the internet. All right. 3 billion. So just under half the world's population is now connected in this way. All right. Interesting. You're like, yeah, okay. So that's great. But then we started seeing, and by we, I mean the world, we began to see mental health issues worldwide with certain ages. And the question was being asked, why is this occurring? Why are we seeing so many clients and patients on these topics around anxiety, depression, rise of certain mental health issues, identity, uh, like being able to know oneself, risk taking, like what's changed? And so they started looking to see maybe it was this event, maybe it was that event, but events themselves don't always have the power to change, though it can create trauma, but not necessarily brain development. So then they started going into the stats. So here is where I want you to pay attention just for the next little bit, because I'm going to ask you what you think about some of these things that I'm going to show you. Okay. Now keep in mind, this is research. This is not opinion. And they did splice it out between how does it affect females versus males, which I find interesting and which is good to see. So here we go. Depression amongst teenagers. Okay. Look what happens here. So late 2010, we start seeing the change, the rise globally amongst depression. This is pre-COVID, folks, right? So we were already on this track. 2015. So remember we talked about the algorithms hit. So up till now, there were still algorithms. It's not like they weren't there, okay? But this was the induction of technology at a very young age during brain development. And then as we proceed further, boom, now we're starting to skyrocket. Okay, 145% increase in females since 2010 for depression. What's happening? Why is that occurring? Boys as well. Boys, even though there's less boys that have depression, but the increase is even higher than girls. So boys' depression rates are even higher as they're trying to figure out their life. Well, what's influencing them? What's the back door to their life that maybe they weren't aware that was happening? So this is interesting. This is about undergraduates diagnosed with mental illness. And the reason why it's interesting that it's undergraduates is so now we're talking about 18, 19-year-olds. Okay. So 18, 19-year-olds going into potentially college or university. So back in 2010, in this, by the way, these lines here have been pretty flat lines for the last, I think it's like 20 years when I took a look, 30 years. Okay. So this is only when the change occurred. So with these beginnings of university kiddos, we started to see mental illness starting to increase. And where do we see it? Anxiety skyrocketing. Depression, which often goes with anxiety, okay, also going up. And this is male, female together, okay, amongst college kiddos. So these are individuals that in their teens, okay, especially those here, 2018, In their teens, they were living here. So they were influenced by some of that brain development with technology. Whereas these folks here were still had that real life influence. There was some influence tech-wise, but predominantly there's still that human to human, but they were also being affected. Remember that part of the brain, pre-Twain, pre-20, that's still being developed? Okay. And then we saw a rise in ADHD, right? That lack of focus that we were talking about. And then some of these other mental illness pieces. And then we start seeing the anxiety piece kicking up. And this anxiety piece really is affected Gen Z, but there's also spillover to the millennials, which is like those that were born in 2000. And so we can see that even here, so when we take a look here, ages 26 to 34, even back in 2010, 2012, we started seeing the increase. And then boom, almost every age level has been affected during the last 15 years, with the exception of 50 plus. What's going on with the 50 plus people? The 50 plus people, what? How was their brains developed? They were developed human to human, 100%. So you can see that their level of resiliency remained consistent. Okay. So this graph is tough to take. So when we take a look at suicide rates, so this is not suicidal ideation, this is actual suicide rates, okay? You can see how in this time here, 2004 to 2008, that it was actually dropping. There's a little bit of a spike there, right, for females, but it was still dropping. During this time, both in education and in our world, before some of the tech things took off, we were really working on how can we make education more relational for kids. I remember this. I worked in Toronto as well as I did in Alberta, and we were focusing on the same things. How can we connect with youth? How can we help parents be the best parent they can? And as we were doing that, it was creating this resiliency, which we started seeing the effect of. Okay. But then 2010 kicks in, the world changes. 2015, the algorithms change. And suddenly we see the skyrocket of suicide rates. And you'll notice that it is higher for boys in terms of the amount of suicide rates versus girls. But the increase percentage-wise is almost double in terms of girls taking their own life. And so in society, we're asking this question, what's changed? Why is this happening? And so when I look at here, this is about self-harm. It's this look at gals that were actually admitted to hospital for self-harm. So the self-harm was so severe that they had to go to the hospital. And in boys, predominantly in the past, self-harm rates were very low. Very low. But now we're starting to see the rise on boys as well. So it's not just the effect is higher. And so they are supposing and presupposing that it is the effect of social media on our psyche and brain development that's causing these issues, because the majority of other ways of growing up remained the same. And as a parent, I'm like, yeah, like I'm trying to raise my kiddos like I grew up, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. And then overall, we saw that excellent or good mental health just also started plummeting. And this is with Canadian women specifically, but you can see between the ages of 15 to 30, look when it really started dropping, 2015. Like the data doesn't lie. And so again, we go back saying, what happened in 2015, 2010, 15, that started this trend? So what's the backstory to this? Before we even got up to seeing the influence of technology on our life, what else was happening in our world? Okay, so the book jumps back to a little bit of preparation. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this, which is called safetyism. So here's black and white pictures. So think grandparents or even maybe your parents. When we went out to play, this is how we play. We these seesaws, it's like you went out there and sometimes people got hurt. Most time they didn't, but sometimes they did, right? And you took risks in your life and you had fun, right? This is the Little Rascals up here. And the whole show is about kids getting into trouble, but taking risks in their life, sometimes smart ones, sometimes not. But remember, brain development, frontal lobe, not quite there yet. But we were outside, and not even just that we were outside, we were in community consistently. And here, this is a crazy shot. So this is a playground, okay? And you're like, what? What kind of playground is this? Yeah. And so a little bit off the top, but the idea here that we're trying to share is that when you see a picture like this, it shows that we allowed kids to take risks. We allow them to say, should I try to stand on the top of that without hanging on? Maybe I should hang on. Yeah, it's a calculated risk. But I mean, if they fall, like if this kid on the center just falls down, I don't know, is he going to survive? Like I was counting this here, and each one, I'm guessing like 12 inches, right? I'm guessing that would be 17 feet high, and I'm like, that's insane. But when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that's about a ladder. But you can see everyone, having fun there. Were there some bad accidents there? Probably. But the idea here is how we looked at growing up was go out there, take some risks, and sort of experience life, right? Makes sense. Now we come to my generation. My generation had playgrounds more like this. So a lot more safe, but still pretty high up. Still lots of interesting things to do. Like I can remember climbing up on one of these things and then, one day falling and my foot got like wrapped up into the chain and like tore some skin off and stuff. Like there's still elements of risk in there. Okay. And I mean, we had this playground with the spinning wheel of death here. This was a blast. You almost always got hurt on it. Like you either, felt like you were going to throw up or like the G-force would just throw you off because there was always some sort of big kid or adult like spinning it as fast as they could. And they removed these. They removed these because there's too many injuries. And they started removing even some of these aspects of climbing because of the injuries. And so this began an era around the 1980s, so Generation X. And the era was around you may not be safe. And I'll tell you why in a second, why this is so important. So when I was in grade 5, I was given a little card to take home. It was like the size of, you know, like that sort of idea. And on the card, there was my picture, and then there were some boxes and some things parents had to fill out. So what they had to do is they had to put my finger on an ink blot and do my fingerprints on this little card, right? Grade 5. They had to take a piece of my hair, slide it in there as well. So they had some DNA, and then they had to fill out information, my weight, all that stuff, eye color, everything. Why were they doing this? In the 80s was the beginning of communicating out that your child may not be safe. Your child might get kidnapped walking home from school. And if that happens, we need to have this information so that we can find the child, identify the child. This is a big deal because this began not just that event, but this thinking began to change my parents in thinking maybe the world isn't safe and I need to do more to keep my kiddo watching, maybe keep them home more, maybe don't interact with as many people unless I am present. And it began this age of parents trying to clear the way so that kiddos didn't have issues in their life in case they got hurt. And physically, it sort of makes sense. I mean, if you're going to be climbing up on something like this, yeah, I'm going to say I don't want my kiddo breaking his neck, right? But then when it starts to translate, well, you can't even play on something like this because if you do and you get hurt, maybe you shouldn't play at all. Now that's going to change me because as a child, young child, I'm going to start thinking, is my life not necessarily safe? So I need to be careful of the risks that I'm taking. Sounds good, right? Like it sounds positive, but the unintended result was it began to train us early not to take risks in life. And when we take risks in life, we learn. And when we take risks in life, we become more resilient. So this is an example of like what we look at now for playgrounds. That looks pretty fun, right? But I mean, chances of getting hurt here are pretty darn slim for sure. And I don't know if you noticed this, like there's people playing over here. Kids are like doing stuff over here. No one is even playing here. It's not that they don't play here, but the risk level, it looks attractive, but it's very low. And so it changed how we think about growing up. So we add or we start with safetyism now for your generation, Gen Z, because I'm the parent of your generation, and I totally fell into that. I wanted to protect my kiddos as much as I could. Like I'm a dad. I'm like, yeah, I don't want anything bad to happen to you. And so I'm going to watch. I'm going to be aware. I thought I was giving good risks for them to take, saying, oh, just let them risk it out. But really, I was already influenced by this unsafety aspect. So that means kiddos are home more, and that means they're looking for more to do. And then this is the introduction of what do you do? Well, maybe you can just do virtual things, and maybe we can develop good relationships virtually. So what we began to see after the 80s and certainly throughout the 90s as I was growing up and starting my own family, we began to see higher and higher isolation amongst teenagers and children unless there was a parent there. And so this graph here, it shows us that time with friends. So remember our brain development, right? Our brain development is affected by people. Okay. So then we start seeing the trend of not being with people continuing to drop, 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 drop. Like over the last years, I have heard the epidemic of loneliness. It's like being around people doesn't mean that you're not lonely. You can be around tons of people and still feel lonely because the connection's not there. And so we're seeing this as well. And again, you can see the drop began around that 2010 area, and then now is just taking off. Yes, the pandemic was here, but we were well on our way before the pandemic. And this is not just teenagers. You can see all of us, the entire, like every generation, we started declining on being with each other. And so we have to ask the question, why? Why is that happening? And so when we look at children development, right? Remember that very soft time in our brain where we're making connections? We are seeing a whole generation where the connections that they're making to the world before their brains even developed is in areas that they have no way to comprehend what they're looking at. And so it's a virtual connection. It's not actually real, right? But your brain, especially as a child, is looking at it saying, this must be what real is. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you have a young child that begins basing their reality on what they're seeing in this little black box here, it's going to change how we think about everything. Who influences our life? Who gets the back door to my identity? All these things. And so this side of social development and social deprivation is continuing. And so what does this mean? So again, let's go back to space real quick. One of the things they found when they were growing plants in zero gravity is that trees would start growing fine, right? Coming up. And then as they were growing, they weren't developing the trunks strong enough. It was weak trunks. And as they were getting higher and higher and higher, The trunks were not really developing in strength, and then eventually the trunks would actually fall over. So what I mean by zero gravity is just lower gravity, or sorry, yeah, lesser gravity than Earth. Okay, so they're simulating if they were growing on Mars or growing um, on the moon. And so then they begin to ask the question, well, why is the tree not growing? It has all the nutrients. It has everything that it needs. Why is it dying? And it's dying because it didn't have wind. See, when a tree grows and the wind blows against it, it breaks the fibers and the fibers regrow back stronger. It's part of its resiliency. So the physical aspect of growth for a tree requires some resistance. So the analogy there is if we don't have the human to human interaction for this brain development for growth, is it going to develop the resiliency that we need in life if it's virtual? If people that are influencing us through social media are not really part of our crew, the people that care about us, and if they have access to influence me, then what does that do to me? That's the question that's being asked, right? Especially for adolescents. So we're running out of time, but so I want to jump into, well, what are they talking about exactly? What harms are we talking about? Yes, we know rise in anxiety, rise in depression, and some of those other mental health issues for sure. It's not like everything is horrible. Okay, this is just generally. But where are they specifically seeing some of the attack? So for females, social comparison, and I think you can understand where that's coming from, is number one, visual comparison. Am I good enough compared to what I see here? And if I'm not good enough compared to what I see here, I'm judging myself. Increased anxiety, increased judgment, increased depression. With that comes perfectionism. If this is what I'm supposed to look like, apparently from society, then how do I get there? I must be perfect to be accepted because this is what I'm seeing is accepted by society. So how do I get there? Perfectionism for human beings, next to impossible. But if that pressure and expectation is on us and we don't reach it, very difficult, right? For sure. Relational aggression, they saw basically an increase of female to female aggression. Emotional contagion. And emotional contagion, what this is taking on someone else's emotion, but it's not your emotion. Okay. So what that means, like the idea here is that it'd be like someone sharing on Twitter how they are afraid of bees, and we should all be afraid of bees because as the bee flew around me, I had a panic attack. And so we need to get rid of bees. And the emotional contagion side is I wonder if I'm afraid of bees. And maybe I agree with you. I don't know if I'm afraid of bees, but I feel like I am afraid of bees. And so now I agree with you. That's an emotional contagion. And they're seeing it's more in females than it is boys in terms of these levels of agreement. Sociogenic mental illness. This is a new term that means the mental illness is tied specifically to social media. So whether it's a dependency on social media, constant comparison with what they see on social media, it's tied, okay, more so with girls than boys. And then girls are more subject to sexual harassment, right? Which we've seen in our society as well, right? Not good. So on the boys' side of things, and I'm going to move a little bit quicker. I got whopping 9 minutes. For males, hearkening back to this risk-taking side of things, they're seeing that males are retreating from the real world. And this has been happening since 1970, but has now really taken off in the last 20 years, 15 years for sure. So they're being less risky. So it's this idea of like, I should really go out and get a job. But if I apply for this job, I might be rejected for that job. And if I'm rejected for the job, I won't feel good. I don't like that feeling of rejection. So, and then maybe I won't apply for the job at all. So for men, it's this idea of I won't take the risk. And because they don't, or predominantly don't want to take the risk, then they feed back into, well, where am I most comfortable? So rise of addictions, addictions with images, pornography, gaming, disassociation with others. That means not wanting to be around other people. They'd rather be by themselves than with others, which of course jumps into doing more video games. And overall, for men, they're saying it's a big attack on their identity. Who are they? Okay. Gals are comparing their identity to others, whereas men are feeling a loss of identity altogether. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So that's a little bit about dissatisfaction. I want to leave you with two more little things that I think are really fascinating. So this is like all these things are coming together in making this sort of perfect storm, right? So if we have this influence of social media that we are slightly addicted to or completely addicted to, and then it interrupts or disrupts our sleep. The research in the last 5 years around sleep has been pretty amazing. This graph that you see right here, this is actually a fairly recent graph of what they understand the brain is doing while you sleep. And the long story short is this. Your brain, when you sleep, is not only resetting itself chemically, it is getting rid of toxins, and we'll call it gray matter that had no purpose in the brain that was built up during that day, and it is flushing itself out. It's called autophagy when our body takes the cells that don't really have a strong purpose, and the good cells are saying you don't need to be here. Could be toxins, could be whatever it is, and they destroy it. And that's a good thing. We want our body and our brains to be doing that every night. Here's why this matters. When you have a consistent good night's sleep, sometimes we don't have a good night's sleep. It's not about the one timer. It's consistent, in which is around 7 hours. Your brain is washing out the things of that day that maybe did breed anxiety, maybe did breed not feeling safe or just having a rough day, sadness, whatever that emotion is. And its job is to clear that out and reset us. So when we wake up in the morning, necessarily our first thought is not our last emotion going to bed. It's this chance to rebuild a new day. That's biologically what we're designed to do, which can help us be extremely resilient in life, right? Just one more day, you can do it. We've heard that all the time. But if you're not getting sleep, it's going to add to the things that we're seeing with anxiety and depression because your brain's not getting a chance to do that routinely. So let me end off with this. You might be saying to yourself, like, so what can I do about this? Like, this is sort of bad news. Yeah, okay, it is. But it's more like awareness, right? And if we know what's going on, then we can maybe help ourselves with that. And so, from a social media app side of things, be aware of this system right here. And that is when we have our phones, we receive a trigger to interact with an app. When we interact with that app, its job as an app is to give us a little bit of a reward. And that reward could be from the app, or it could be, here's the picture that you're looking at. Wow, that's interesting. And it's a little dopamine hit, which is a positive reward in our brain. And when that happens, they are hoping the next thing will be, if you like that, then you will be invested in it. That means maybe you'll do it next time instead of us. And then when the cycle reboots, what they're hoping will happen is that you don't necessarily need an external trigger, like something pops up on your phone to say, hey, click here. Maybe you will say, you know what? I like going to those shorts on YouTube. I'll pick on shorts. I've been doing it already. And I'll just start scrolling down because I remember like my body likes that little dopamine hit. And so you become the trigger. You do the action. You get the reward. You become more invested. And this is becoming a very slight addiction cycle, which just gets reinforced, reinforced. And we know what? Neurons that fire together, wire together. So as neurons are firing and you're receiving this gratification, you're reinforcing the pathway. So if you're thinking, I feel like I am being influenced by all these things, Mr. Smith, that you're talking about. How do I get past it? Having that awareness is the beginning, right? Step one. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I can see these aspects of my life. So, number two is then who's getting the back door in your life? Okay, real life versus the moon, as it were, virtual. And start thinking about who's getting this backdoor entry to you, because you've been wired a certain way brainways if you were brought up having that type of connection with technology. But you can counteract it by being aware and making some choices in your life. So I've given you like a full book in like 1 hour. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it today. I know it really has changed how I think about things as well. And thanks so much for joining me.